There are moments in life that define you, and for a young man named Trey, this was one of them. Sitting across from Clint Eastwood in a dimly lit diner, he had no idea that this wasn't just a casual meal. It was a test, dear listeners. Before we move forward, please subscribe my channel to hit 1,000 figure. Trey had come to pick up his girlfriend, but instead, he found himself face to face with her gruff, no-nonsense neighbor, Clint Eastwood, a man who had seen war, fought battles most couldn't imagine, and lived by a code that didn't tolerate weakness. Clint took a slow sip of his black coffee, eyes locked on the young man, sizing him up like a drill sergeant inspecting a rookie soldier. Trey tried to act cool, but the weight of Clint's stare made his palms sweat. "So, you're the guy dating Sue?" Clint finally spoke, his voice low, steady, like a man who had no patience for nonsense. Trey nodded nervously. "Yes, sir." Clint leaned in slightly, his expression unreadable. "You ever worked a day in your life, kid?" Trey chuckled awkwardly, sensing the tension. Yeah. I mean, I've had jobs." Clint didn't smile. He didn't blink. The air around them thickened. "Good, 'cause I don't like weak men." The young man swallowed hard. He thought this was just dinner, but he was starting to realize this was something else entirely. Trey shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had expected small talk, maybe some harmless teasing, but this was something different. Clint Eastwood wasn't just talking to him, he was testing him. Clint leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. His weathered face, lined with years of experience, told Trey that this wasn't a man to joke around with. "You shake hands like a man, kid?" Clint asked suddenly. Trey hesitated, then offered his hand. Clint took it, firm, unyielding. The grip wasn't just a handshake, it was a statement. Trey winced slightly, trying not to show weakness. "Not bad," Clint muttered, releasing his grip. "I've seen worse." The waitress arrived with their food, but Trey had already lost his appetite. Clint, on the other hand, picked up his sandwich without breaking eye contact. "Let me tell you something, kid," Clint said, taking a slow bite. "Men don't mumble, they don't slouch, and they sure as hell don't let their women walk all over 'em." Trey nodded quickly, desperate to pass whatever unspoken test he was taking. "You got a job?" Clint continued. I'm in school," Trey stammered. Clint smirked. "School's fine, but a man works, he earns, he takes responsibility." Trey felt small under Clint's scrutiny, but deep down he knew this wasn't just tough guy talk. This was a lesson, and if he wanted Clint's respect, he'd have to prove himself. The diner buzzed with the sound of clinking silverware and low conversations, but for Trey, the only thing that mattered was Clint Eastwood sitting across from him, eyes sharp, voice calm, but carrying the weight of authority. Clint wiped his mouth with a napkin, then set it down deliberately. His gaze never wavered. "All right, kid. Let's say you and Sue are walking down the street. It's late. Some punks start following you. What do you do?" Trey hesitated. He knew there was a right answer here, but what was it? I'd get her out of there. Call for help?" Trey offered weakly. Clint shook his head, unimpressed. "Wrong. You stand your ground. You don't show fear. You let 'em know you're not an easy target." Trey swallowed hard. "You ever throw a punch, kid?" Clint asked, narrowing his eyes. Not really." Clint sighed, shaking his head. "Figures. You kids today think a cell phone's gonna save you. Let me tell you something. When trouble comes, no one's gonna do a damn thing for you. You gotta be ready to handle yourself. Defend what's yours. Protect your girl. Otherwise, you're just waiting to be a victim." Trey shifted in his seat. This was more than just an old man giving advice. This was Clint Eastwood's rules of survival. And Trey was beginning to realize that he wasn't measuring up. Then, Clint leaned in slightly, voice dropping lower. "You got a backbone, kid? 'Cause if you don't, you're not gonna last long in this world." Trey knew in that moment this wasn't just some intimidating conversation. This was a challenge. And the way he responded next would decide whether Clint Eastwood saw him as a boy or a man. Trey could feel the weight of Clint Eastwood's stare pressing down on him. This wasn't just an interrogation, it was a rite of passage. He had two choices: back down like a scared kid or prove he was worth Clint's respect. He straightened his back, squared his shoulders, and met Clint's gaze head-on. "I'm not afraid to stand up for myself," he said, his voice firmer than before. Clint raised an eyebrow, amused. "That so?" Trey nodded. "Yeah, I might not be the toughest guy, but I take care of the people I care about. And if I had to fight for Sue, I would." For the first time all night, Clint gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Good," he muttered, tossing a few bills on the table for the check. "About damn time you showed some spine." As Clint stood up, he looked Trey over one last time, like a man deciding whether to give his final approval. Then, with a smirk, he clapped Trey on the shoulder. "Maybe you're not completely hopeless, kid." Trey let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. He had passed the test. As Clint walked toward the exit, he called back over his shoulder, "Don't screw it up." And just like that, he was gone, leaving Trey sitting there, a little shaken, but also a little different. Because tonight, he hadn't just met Clint Eastwood. He had been measured, tested, and made into a man.